Hi, welcome to Werks. Today we're going to be making a custom kitchen cart.
I'll start this project just by cutting this piece of butcher block down to size. For the legs I used 2-inch round stainless steel tubing. I'll start by cutting them down to size with the bandsaw. To later add casters, I made these plugs to weld into the bottom of the tube from some round stock. I'll use my belt grinder with a polishing belt to polish the stainless, followed by some elbow grease and then a buffing wheel. Once the legs are done, I can move on to making the grates for shelving.
So we got a couple of these to work with here. So here I'm going to cut these as a gang. That way I can cut a lot of them at the same time and ensure they're all the same length. Well, I really don't have any good roller stands, but sometimes you got to just use what you got. That's what I'm going to use here. Alright, so as you can see I have a whole lot of these 1/4-inch rods, 18 inches long. I need to take them over to the belt sander and just deburr each edge.
To space the bars out evenly, I originally tried to use some plywood blocks as spacers. This ended up not working as well as I thought, and I had better results just measuring to each bar individually with the tape measure. I used a piece of flat stock across the back to keep all the bars aligned, and a V-block as a clamp to hold the bars down while I welded them in place. After welding the front and back, I can then weld all the middle bars in place. When welding, the heat can distort the metal as it cools, especially with stainless steel and smaller diameter rods, so you can see how curved this entire grate was when I was finished. All I did here was use the welder to heat the underside. Anywhere there's a weld on the top, I use the torch to tack the bottom without any fill rod. Essentially all I'm doing here is reapplying the same amount of heat to the bottom as was applied to the top, and it worked surprisingly well.
Maybe out by a 30-second over the whole thing. I'm pretty happy with that.
Here I'm using some flat stock to make a frame to attach the legs to the underside of the butcher block. Whoa! Now I can lay out the holes and drill the frame.
I can't have holes in the front here because if there's bolts there, they'll interfere with the drawers.
I'll use threaded inserts in the butcher block. I can now tack the legs to the frame. I'll tack everything first to allow for adjustment. That way I can make sure everything is square before I fully weld it. So here I've cut a bunch of blocks of wood all to the same height. That way I can rest the shelf on there, knowing that it's going to be in the right location. I'll find the right size tap so that I can thread the holes for the casters. Using a wire wheel on my drill, I'll go around and clean up all the welds. Now I can begin working on the top and drawers. I'll start by laying out my parts, then I can cut everything roughly to size. Now I can mill everything to its final dimension. I'll use a crosscut sled to cut my drawer parts to length, and then check them with a square.
Alright, so I've got my pieces cut out here. I'm going to make a simple box joint jig, just so I can box joint these together. I think box joints will be perfect for this.
I'm going to be making 1/2 inch box joints, so I'll start by ripping a strip of wood exactly to 1/2 inch. Next, I'll set up a 1/2 inch dado stack in the table saw. I'll mount a sacrificial scrap of plywood to my miter gauge and make sure everything is perfectly square. Now I can run the miter gauge through the blade and glue the 1/2 inch strip into the slot. Once the strip is glued in place, I can detach the fence from the miter gauge and use an offcut from the same 1/2 inch strip as a spacer between the blade and the strip, and then I can screw the fence back to the miter gauge. The last thing to do is to set the height of the blade to the same thickness as my workpiece. Now I'll make a test cut on some scraps. My dado stack didn't leave the cleanest cut, so I'll just go back in with the chisel to clean it up a little bit. I'll cut a groove in the sides for the drawer bottom. Over at the router table, I will cut a groove down the side of the drawers for the drawer slides. I'll use my trim router to round over all the edges of the drawers. Now just a little cleanup with the chisel, and a little good old hand sanding. Then I'll run around the entire drawer with the sander, just to smooth everything out of the way. Now I'll start cutting up the parts for the drawer slides. I'll just make these out of some maple stock. Nothing fancy here, just an L-shaped piece of maple. You can see I cut a groove down the side and then I'm gluing in a little strip. And now drilling the holes. I'll hand sand these down so they're nice and smooth. Now I can put the metal base onto the top and mark out exactly where my drawers and drawer slides are going to go. I find these little 6-inch rules to be super handy for stuff like this. Once I've got everything laid out, I can drill these in, screw them in place. Here I have my drawer front, which I'm cutting down to size. I made sure to use a nice piece, so I have a nice continuous grain match all the way across the front. Ripping it down to final size.
Well, I'm 95% of the way there, and then I realized that I cut one of these at 18 1/4 instead of 18 3/4. So I'm going to need to grab a new board and make new fronts. And that's a real bummer. So remember to check your measurements.
With the new drawer fronts made, I can sand them out and run around them with the trim router as well. Just spacing everything out here to make sure they line up well and have the proper gap. And now I can glue them into place so they're permanent. Here I'm setting up to spray my finish. For this project I just used lacquer. Now just rubbing out the first coat, 400 grit sandpaper over the whole thing to just knock down any of the nubs. You can see I forgot to put my brand on, so I had to do it through the lacquer, which is not great, but it does still work. Then running over everything with a second and third coat, and just sanding this drawer out here.
When I sand drawers, I like to make sure I go right up against the edge. And when I feel rough spots, I'll just go back and hit it again. I like to really pay close attention to drawers because that's the spot that's going to get the most physical touch.
Here I'm having my brother help me move the frame into place, and now I can bolt it down into the threaded inserts. Now I'll take some masking tape and just put it over the casters to protect them from getting scratched before delivery. Here I'll just wipe on a final coat of wax to give everything a final coat of protection. Now laying out the holes for the drawer pulls. Here I make a little block to stop the drawer at the back side. And just install that underneath behind the drawer.
So one of the things I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a little block of wood inside of the drawer so that you can't pull it out all the way. I'm going to take this little block that I'm going to install in there, and I'm just going to poke the screws through a little bit. I'm going to reach into the drawer and push this all the way against the back of the drawer and push it up. That'll leave two little indents, and you really want to push it pretty hard so that you can really see where it is.
And with this last piece installed, the kitchen cart is done. Thanks for watching.